So a few years ago, I befriended a girl who had a really troubled past. She was really mentally unstable, but she was very kind to me, so I would kept her company. After only being a friend of her for few weeks, something terrible happened to both of us. It was traumatic and affected both of us greatly, but I soon recovered from it and stayed by her as she dealt with it. What happened to me would have never happened if I was not her friend, but I never held that against her because why would I? I believed she didn't mean to hurt me. This is all context that will make this large story into sense. After what we experienced, we became closer because we went through it together. I guess kind of like a trauma bond. So we began to spend more time together. Time passes and I began sensing something supernatural about her. She began to show me her different personalities, and at times her tone of voice would drastically change too. It was strange, but it didn't scare me because I have a solid spiritual foundation and felt protected. She was a very intense person to be around, and she would tell me she heard voices and was able to do supernatural things. I honestly didn't believe her and thought she was in some kind of psychosis. I still lent a hand out for support towards her because I felt bad for her. She also always made it clear that she felt a presence around her. One day she was sitting on my bed in a manic episode that she would regularly get into, and she screamed, "I am God," and the lights in my room turned off. I knew instantly that whatever just happened was evil. The same night I went to sleep terrified and exhausted from being around her energy. I woke up the next morning to see the bundle of sage I lit on my table was on the floor. My bedroom rug had about 2-inch deep hole from the sage burning through it. I was shocked. How could the sage be flung to the ground like that while on fire? It didn't make any logical sense, and I realized my apartment could have caught on fire while I was asleep. I almost stopped being her friend that day, but the next day she begged to see me and told me how grateful she was to be around me. Again, I felt bad for her. A few months passed, and I experienced few other things being around her, like suddenly being able to hear people's angry thought around me, even though they weren't talking. Strangely, their physical action reflected what I was hearing. I already thought I was going crazy. I still kept being around her because it appeared that her energies were calming down and things were looking better for her, but I should have known. All of this leads up to the experience I have been most perplexed by. We eventually decided to move in with each other. Worst idea ever. I began to feel a presence in my apartment, and it was an happy one. I began feeling uncomfortable alone, and when I would express to her how I was feeling, she would reassure me that I wasn't alone, and she had always felt the same. That didn't make me feel better, but at least I knew I wasn't alone. One day, we had come home from a party, and we both went to our room to sleep. I was in my bed relaxing, drifting to sleep, when my roommate's voices began to fill my room. I still don't know if the voices was actually in my room or in my head, but I remember being confused and thinking, why can I hear her so loudly? Then all of a sudden, her voices changed into nasty, scary screeching sound that I immediately knew was demon. While it was happening, I remember doing some kind of mental defense against it. After a few minutes, it suddenly stopped. It was so surreal. I sat there replaying what happened over and over again. It was like the demon was mimicking her voices to real me, and when I realized it, I was actually listening to it. It began screeching and speaking in a language I couldn't understand. We eventually went our separate ways. She was constantly having unexplainable bad things happen to her, and she even turned on to me and went as far to tell me that I ruined her life and brought terrible things upon her, which I knew wasn't true. It was just evil speaking out of her. She did some other really horrible things to hurt me, but I truly believe it was a demon or a negative energy that was making her snap toward everyone that cared for her. She did that to everyone in her life that expressed love to her. I always sensed she was going through an intense internal battle within her, and at times the evil would win. Since exiting her life, I haven't experienced the negativity I felt around her, stopped feeling scared, and stopped hearing the voices. I'm curious if anyone else had lived with or been around with someone that has negative attachment, and if it had affected them in the way it did to me. So interesting that I was able to tap into psychic ability being around her. I may be sensitive to it since I've experienced paranormal events since being a child. So my first contact with the ghost was when I was temporarily staying in a hotel with sister, mother and father. I was around 13 at the time and was terrified of the thought of spirits. I was walking back to the bathroom while they were all sleeping, and when I made a turn to get into the bed, my eyes instantly darted to around 6 foot shadow figure in the doorway of the bathroom area. Me being scared instantly hid under the cover for about 5 minutes, and when I got out from the under the covers, it was gone. The next morning, I informed my mother on what I saw, and apparently my sister had saw the same thing standing over her 2 weeks before, and she thought it was my father since it was really dark. My next encounter, which I had no idea if they are connected, was when I was 14. My parents, sister, and I had moved into a new house, and everything was fine for first few weeks. One night, when my father was at work, my mother was in her room, and my sister was asleep. I heard a quiet, childlike whisper saying, "Hey." I once again instantly went and told my mother, and she said I could sleep in her room. I invited my sister to come in the room as well and sleep, but she said no. A few minutes later, a container on a table fell off, and it was a pretty big table, so even if it was a gust of wind, it wouldn't have fell off. Then my sister came and slept with us. I still see tiny white orbs suddenly flashing around the room pretty often. Things still casually fell off. I still hear whispers like "hey" to me, and other things it says are usually not understandable. My most recent encounter was when my sister was gone to work and I was home with my mother and father. They were both in their room, and I had stayed up over 24 hours due to things falling over and speaking to me. For some reason, I was pretending I was talking to my sister and I had my eyes closed, and then I heard an echoey voice say something, but I was so close to being asleep I didn't understand. I tried to convince myself that I had something mentally wrong until one night my mother slept in my room to see if she heard anything, and we both heard a quiet, low whisper next to our ears, "Hey." Just thought I would share my experience here, even though most likely no one will believe me for how crazy it sounds. In June of 2008, my family moved to a new house. It was my grandparents and my dad who got it after they died. It was built in 1950s, and by those standards was a mansion. It's a quite a big house with 3 levels, the main floor, a basement and an upstairs. My sister and I had the biggest room, as we would be sharing it, was up the stairs and all the way down to the hallway. So it was quite hard to go up and down without being hurt. But while we were in our room, no one downstairs could hear us. We couldn't hear them unless they were yelling very loud. While moving in, I was about 4 and my sister was about 6. Because of this, our parents helped us and we were told to stay in our room. We didn't want to help move in, so we were okay with it. My grandparents had weird style, so the walls of our room were painted teal and the floor was mossy green carpet. It was shockingly cold in there for being June, and there were no blinds on the window. There was also no light installed in the room, but there was in the closet. To put it simply, it had a very weird vibe. Me and my sister, who I will be calling Jay for the remainder of this story, bundled up and started to play with our dolls. Our dolls were our prized possession. We had probably 30 and the collection continued to grow. However, none of our other siblings cared for them, so Jay and I almost always played alone. We were playing in the closet because it had a light and more controlled temperature when suddenly there were 2 girls in the doorway of the closet. They looked normal enough, around our same age, so when they asked if they could play, we said yes. They told us they lived in the house before we did, which I didn't realize wasn't possible at the time. After only about a minute of playing, they asked if they could tell us a story. Me and Jay wanted to make some friends, so we said yes. They both showed their arm to us, and they had 3 massive scars from elbow to wrist. They told us they had gotten from the Bloody Mary. Jay and I had never heard of Bloody Mary, so they explained her to us. They said she was the queen with the thirst of blood, and if we went into the bathroom mirror and said her name 3 times, she would appear. So we went into the bathroom where Jay told me she thought their scars were from a cat and I had nothing to worry about. We turned the lights off, but because there was a big window in the bathroom, there was still a lot of light. Finally, I calmed down enough to chant, so we did. Not a chill, or a face, or a scratch, nothing. Jay and I laughed it off and left the bathroom. The girls who had been standing in the front of the door were no longer there. We figured they would have gone to our room, so we went back in there and there was no one. The stairs were very loud and you can hear them very well through the bathroom door. So they couldn't have gone back downstairs while we were in there. They were just gone. Our parents called us downstairs for dinner. We had already forgotten that something weird had happened, so we didn't ask. In fact, we had forgotten all about it for a long time. Until a few years ago, we finally realized it was weird. So we decided to ask who those girls were. Our family was confused and we didn't know why. We asked again, and what they said sent a chill down my spine. No one went upstairs after you guys, and definitely no girls lived here before us. Needless to say, I was glad I had a new room at that point. Still live in that house though, and weird noises still happens all the time.